Welcome to another episode of the Byline Breakdown, where we dive into the stories behind the headlines. I'm your host, Mike Moliterno, and today we have a fascinating tale to share with you. It is a story that involves a seemingly ordinary stretch of road with a curious name. Our guest today is Dan O'Brien, managing editor of the Business Journal and author of the story. Thank you for being here, Dan.
Hi, Mike.
So, Dan, we were there. You and I both went to the center of the world. It exists. It is a real place. And amazingly, it's actually located in the Mahoning Valley. There's signs. It's official. That's where it is.
Yep, we were there all right. We're
Right.
in the center of the world.
There is signage to prove it.
There's signage to prove
We
it,
have
indeed,
photos.
right on State Route 5 in Braceville Township in
Yeah.
Trumbull County. So it's roughly just under a mile stretch of road on State Route 5, and
Well, I guess for
bracketed
people
by
who-
by 2 cents, center of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for people who don't know, who've never driven there, because there's really not a lot there, so it's easy to live in this area and not know that it exists. There are signs labeling this stretch of Route 5 as the center of the world.
Yeah, and that's always piqued my curiosity about why this unincorporated hamlet with maybe a handful of residents and a handful of businesses earned the bragging rights to center of the world, and why has this moniker stuck over these years. And I thought it would be an interesting way to introduce this new series that we're starting this year called What's in a Name, where we kind of look at different communities and the names they've been given and the stories behind these names. And I thought center of the world was the perfect subject to start this out this year. And so center of the world area there has become kind of a roadside attraction over the years, in which, you know, folks who are passing through there stop, turn around, and want to take a picture next to this sign that says center of the world,
Right.
for whatever reason. And it's, from what I understand, been going on for decades now. And I always wondered why this particular area of Braceville Township has earned the name Center of the World.
Right. So I grew up in Braceville, and what I heard, so I was interested in what we would find out when you were doing the story, but I had always heard that it was called Center of the World because it was in between Braceville, Leavittsburg, and Newton Falls. That's what I always heard. So it turns out that that's really not true. It has nothing to do with it.
No, it has
but
nothing to do
I
with it.
just always assumed, like, oh, okay, so it's, you know, this kind of small view of, you know, maybe way back in the day that was, you know, those were the only towns you might ever visit. So this was technically the center of the world, but that's not true. So I guess, why is it called Center of the World? What did we find out?
Well, this goes back a way. It goes back to the 19th century, when Ohio is in the sort of transitional period between the frontier and great commercial activity and industrial activity. And in that area, especially around State Route 5, generally following that pathway, and that particular area of Braceville, there happened to be a stagecoach line that ran from Pittsburgh to Akron. And at the same time, it ran parallel to a canal that was also serving part of that area. So there was active commercial usage throughout this whole particular area of Braceville. And that said, it created a bit of lure for folks who were looking to set their feet down in this newly minted region of the United States, really. Only Ohio became a state in 1803, so we're talking about the mid-1840s when a risk-prone entrepreneur by the name of Randall Wilmot appears on the scene, and he establishes a general store, which he dubs Center of the World.
Right.
And this is a general store that is going to be situated right at the corner of State Route 5 and the 82 bridge going over the Mahoning River.
Right, yeah.
So you have a number of attributes here. You have the Mahoning River there. You've got a stagecoach line going through. You've got a canal nearby. All of this seems to coalesce into a nice little business community that's going to be established here in Braceville. And, Randall Wilmot thinks that this is the perfect site for this new general store that he's going to open up. And so he does, and he names it Center of the World. So Wilmot is credited with this name, and the moniker is stuck since then.
Why did he call it Center of the World?
Well, he called it Center of the World because he had earlier in New York established another general store called Beginning of the World.
Right.
And so
now it all makes sense.
So he started actually Beginning of the World, and he had moved around eventually into Pennsylvania, into Bethel, Pennsylvania, I believe, into Dymock, Pennsylvania, and other areas kind of around the Scranton region, I imagine. And then eventually ventured into Ohio, where he spent some time running a tavern in Geauga, I believe, and then moved down to the Braceville area where he set up shop again. And he thought it was a perfect place. As long as the stagecoach line was active, he could ply his trades there. So it seemed like the most practical place for his new business in 1845 when it was established.
And he ended up going to Cortland and establishing
another.
Which is where I live now. So I'm
moved
apparently
to Cortland,
following
so you're following this guy around.
Yeah.
It looks like, huh?
Right.
In the footsteps of Randall Wilmot.
Exactly.
So then he moves to Cortland, where he actually establishes another general store called End of the World.
Right.
So it's
for him it was.
Wilmot, it was the last place he's going to live. Yes, he had moved around a lot in his lifetime, but Randall Wilmot is a bit of a fascinating character here for local lore, and did pretty good with his general stores here. He had hit some financial problems back in Pennsylvania, as well as probably New York as well. His son, David Wilmot, would eventually be elected to the House of Representatives. He finishes law school, and then eventually also to the Senate. And he's a very influential member of Congress. And in 1846, David Wilmot introduces what is known as the Wilmot Proviso, which is this rider attached to a spending bill that addresses the territory that the United States would acquire as a result of the Mexican-American War. Mm-hmm. And what the proviso says is that this territory would be closed to slavery. So it's the proviso in 1846 that really reignites that debate over slavery in Congress. And it's one of those factors where we see that division continuing to walk its way right up to the Civil War. So it's Wilmot whose proviso really begins this discussion. It's not going to pass. It's eventually going to be reconciled without it being attached to the spending bill. But you see these connections throughout the Valley in this history to really important episodes in American history. And Randall Wilmot, his father, considering the research that I've done, had to be bailed out on a few occasions by his son David, financially, but eventually rests here in Braceville with his business opportunities.
And I believe Randall is buried in Cortland?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah.
I believe he's buried in the Cortland Cemetery, yes.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk a little bit about what is at the center of the world today and what Dan and I found when we took a journey out there earlier this month. So we'll be right back.
Attention all business enthusiasts in Northeast Ohio and Western Pennsylvania. The Business Journal has been your trusted partner since 1984, giving insights, updates, and fostering growth in your region. From Mahoning to Mercer, from Columbiana to Lawrence, we've got you covered. For just $10 a month or $99 a year, unlock our digital troves, or get both print and digital for only $99 a year. Make the smart business choice. Subscribe now.
Welcome back to the Byline Breakdown. We're here with Dan O'Brien, managing editor of the Business Journal, and we are discussing the fascinating history of the center of the world in, I guess it's technically Braceville, right?
Yeah.
So, Dan, we went out there to talk to some of the residents. Could you tell us a little bit about what we found when we were out there? What do the residents know of the history of this place?
Well, the residents were fairly informed about the history, the ones that we talked to. They'd been living there pretty much their entire lives. So they do know to a certain extent the origins of the name center of the world. They associate it with a general store. They associate it with some sort of business or what have you, an inn that may have helped travelers along the stagecoach line. So there's a number of businesses that have existed there for a long time, a number of residents who have lived in the neighborhood for a very long time, 50 years or so. They can recollect when it was just a dirt road across there now, long before it was paved and designated as State Route 5. So there's some living history to this as well, and some of the folks we talked to had recollections of talking to those who had lived in the community years before, some of the elder folks who would hand down stories as well, types of oral histories and oral legends, if you will, of the community. And that was fascinating, too. And one of the things that we had learned was an abandoned house down the road a bit, and one of the residents, and one who has worked there for close to 40 or 50 years, had said that this house was once used as an inn along the stagecoach line, not unlike what Wilmot was doing at Center of the World.
Right.
And so we found the house, and lo and behold, it is vacant, it's in disrepair, and it's probably earmarked for the wrecking ball, for what I understand.
So the house, if you're going, I guess west down 5, once you go past the 582 intersection, it's, I don't know, maybe a quarter mile down on the right.
Yeah, on the right-hand side.
Red brick house.
Yes, and if the data from the auditor's office is correct, the house was built in 1810. Which predates the arrival of Wilmot, but also pegs it right at the forefront of this part of the frontier, period of the frontier. And it looks like a lot has been added on, but the initial foundation, it looks like the initial building may match up to 1810, back when James Madison was president of the United States. So it's one of, if that's right, it's probably one of the oldest structures in Trumbull County.
Obviously, it's the only remaining structure from that time period that's there. I guess. What does the center of the world look like today?
Well, there's not a whole lot there.
Right.
There's a number of auto businesses, auto repair businesses. There are a handful of residents that still live at the center of the world. And they'll tell you that they see folks stopping by that sign, taking pictures of it, putting it on Facebook or putting it on social media. And elected officials will also say that they say it's become this sort of roadside attraction. Folks all over the place, license plates who are passing through all over the United States, stop by the center of the world just because they're curious as to why this nondescript area of Trumbull County is home to the center of the world. So it's a busy thoroughfare. There's no question about it. I mean, it's a very busy thoroughfare. And there's, like I said, still a handful of businesses left on the stretch, and some folks who still live there and had been living there for a very long time.
Shout out to the old Lucky Inn. The building is still there, but the business isn't there. That's where I did most of my drinking in my younger days. So if anyone's from Braceville, they know what the Lucky Inn is.
The Lucky Inn,
yeah,
yes.
It was in the center of the world.
And that's closed today?
Yeah, that business closed a while ago.
That must hurt.
The building is still there. It breaks my heart.
That must have hurt to
a little bit.
See that.
But Dan, you mentioned this is the first story in a new series that we're doing called What's in a Name, where you're going to be going around finding out kind of the weird names of a lot of local places. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the next story that's coming up in this series?
Sure.
You're sticking with Braceville.
Yeah, I'm still up in Braceville right now, but we're going to meander throughout the 5-county region. And so I was intrigued at the name Phalanx and why a, once again, unincorporated area of Braceville Township earned that name. So I was very curious about that. And I began doing some digging, and stand by. Our next issue will look into why this particular area earned its name, why it's there, and why it's still referred to as Phalanx to this day, and really some interesting stories behind it.
Yeah, and similar to Center of the World, there are little green signs on the side of the road.
Yes, there are.
Naming it. I guess at the Center of the World, we found out, or some residents told us, that they used to have some more prominent signs displaying the title.
One of the great
they became problematic
urban legends, or I should say, some of the great stories is that they had more prominent signs, but it really was in high demand, so people kept stealing them.
Right.
So they decided to replace them with these sort of this Department of Transportation, green and white road signs that many folks, it looks like today, first of all, getting it out of there is going to be very difficult to do.
They're deep.
Looks like, they're deep in there, and it'd be hard work just to steal one of these things, I think, today. But nevertheless, folks don't see it as a very colorful sign to steal any longer. So they've been replaced with that. And so it's an interesting little corner of our world here in the Mahoning Valley. And we hope to certainly continue to enlighten folks as to why these communities are named as they are and the stories behind them.
There you have it. The history of the Center of the World. So the next time you're heading to Akron or out west, take Route 5. Once you get near Braceville, keep your eyes peeled for the little green signs. You're in the center of the world. Stop, take a picture. But be careful because it's a busy road. Well, thank you very much for being here, Dan. And that is all for this week's episode of the Byline Breakdown. If you'd like to read Dan's story, a link is available in the show notes. We'll see you next time on the Byline Breakdown. I'm Mike Molitorno.
You wouldn't drive a car without a map, so why navigate the business world of northeastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania without the Business Journal? Trusted since 1984, we're the compass pointing you to growth and prosperity. Digital, print, why not both? We've got subscription options tailored for every business-savvy individual. Light up your path to success. Subscribe to the Business Journal today.